Now, just to go over things first, what was my original timeline proposed in that last theory? Well, it starts with FNAF 4 in 1983 that we see thanks to the TV in Crying Child's house. Then we see the 1985 part of Into the Pit, followed by FNAF 2 and Freddy Fazbear's grand reopening in 1987. FNAF 1 takes place after that in 1993, calculated by Matt Patton in his first theory video, as well as being confirmed by a Faz fact from FNAF AR. Then comes Into the Pit with the present day, at least the present day in the book, and I'm including Into the Pit because time travel would technically be required, and Into the Pit is what introduces time travel. And then we run into FNAF AR. Now, the FNAF AR emails have dates ranging the game from 2019 to 2021, which I'm guessing is dependent on when you are actually playing the game, since it's meant to be the present day. And since Security Breach is linked to special delivery via those emails and Ness along with the other weird happenings, we can reasonably assume that Security Breach would come next. Then we have to fast forward 2 years and see FNAF 3 with the Fazbear Frights attraction and sister location happening simultaneously thanks to the secret sister location ending. And to end the current timeline, we have FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, and VR happening one after each other. However, we only know that FNAF VR takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 thanks to the Man in Room 1280 from Bunny Call, the most controversial point in this timeline being FNAF 3 taking place after Security Breach and AR, which a lot of people seem to have issues with. Obviously, there are some discrepancies that need to be made when talking about the FNAF timeline, since as Scott sees the story play out in his mind, previous moments may not align to a perfect fit, so information that is revealed later should be taken as a priority, like Matt Pat stated in his most recent timeline video after Ultimate Custom Night's release. So they didn't find Springtrap until night 2 of FNAF 3 would have to be replaced with them discovering Springtrap sooner than we thought, but only releasing him later on while trying to test to make sure everything was working before opening Fazbear's Fright, so that he could then appear as a character in special delivery, maybe perhaps as a way to hype up the actual location. But there's another problem that I want to address, saying that we have seen a Spring Bonnie time travel before, like in Into the Pit, so time travel is not out of the question for this scenario. There also seem to be quite a few people who believe that FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, since we know that the FNAF 4 location closed thanks to Crying Child getting chomped, so 30 years after 1983 would be 2013. However, the description for FNAF 3 states that, quote, 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, meaning that the establishment was indeed called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and to our understanding, that bite incident from FNAF 4 actually took place in Fredbear's Family Diner, thanks to the limited number of animatronics as well as them both being gold. While yes, other Freddy Fazbear's locations at this time were open, this incident did not occur at one, and this begs the question, does FNAF 3 rather take place in 2017, after the FNAF 2 location closes? Well, if we look back at that quote again, we know that that's not the case, since it says itself that, quote, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, which couldn't be the case given that the FNAF 1 location that takes place in 1993 wouldn't be open if that's really what happened. If the 1987 location was the last one to close, it would make sense, but there being another Freddy Fazbear's open in 1993 means that the tragedies have not yet become a distant memory, especially since they're posting news clippings about the original incidents on the walls. And even if we didn't put them there, someone else is posting them on the wall as a prank. Sure, the hallucinations may be what causes them to change, but they're not the reason they're actually on the wall. We can still see the articles when we aren't hallucinating anyways, like in the first few nights. So why do I think that FNAF 3 has to take place after Security Breach? Because there seems to be a lot going on. Hell, what I'm saying now could even be pointing towards Security Breach taking place in the 80s if you look at it a certain way, since thanks to Montgomery Gator we have all the proof we need. Take a look at the characters in the background of the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, the ones in color at least. They have various different masks on that are each pretty much explained away thanks to the mediocre melodies introduced in FNAF 6, Pig Patch, Orville Elephant, and the Hippo guy. However, there are a couple outliers even with these other animatronics. The first one being the very first guy on this lineup who's wearing a green mask, which absolutely could be referring to Happy Frog, but that doesn't look like a freaking frog to me. Are you kidding? Frogs don't have those kind of faces. Even animatronic ones would not have a snout that goddamn long. A frog's face does not come out to here, people, okay? You know what does though? Alligators. And who do we see in Security Breach? A green alligator with a long snout. Who else do we see? A wolf who maybe seems to be the same color that Bonnie was, which as we learn is supposed to be blue despite looking purple. And what other mask do we see that doesn't have a mediocre Melodies equivalent? A blue mask with a snout like a wolf would have. Interesting. So, are the two new main lineup animatronics actually present in the Happiest Day minigame? We can't say for certain after all because these are 8-bit, but it certainly makes a hell of a lot more sense now, right? Plus I don't care if it's a robotic frog or not, okay? No frog is going to have that freaking snout, okay? It's not gonna be out here, and it's not gonna be this thin, okay? That's an alligator. According to police reports that saw the substance in the FNAF books, it's appeared to be a bubbling liquid mercury. The appearance of this glowing silvery liquid is similar to Remnant depicted in the novel trilogy, particularly in the fourth closet, which makes sense given that Remnant, as we know, is a combination of human soul and metal, which is created when a soul possesses a metal-based object like an animatronic endoskeleton. In the Fazbear Frights books, where most of this lore comes from, its powers are expanded upon. Remnant can be used to make already living beings even more powerful through the power of positive memories. Kind of like how everyone gets defeated by the power of love in The Flash. The primary scientist studying Remnant is Dr. Talbert, a friend of Phineas Taggart who studied its negative counterpart, Agony, which now means that the Agony that possesses animatronics and the human soul are two different things, but seemingly both of which had to come from someone who died. Talbert studied Remnant because his daughter Renelle was sick when she was younger and he wanted to hold on to the good memories of her in case he lost her. Remnant could also be isolated and put into a certain object, so Talbert created a pendant made from Remnant metal as a gift for Renelle. Keep in mind that this Remnant is also just a form of metal. It's kind of like a metal compound, like Damascus steel, but instead of a lot of layers of steel, it's metal and souls melted down, and then that is liquid Remnant, but then as a solid, I guess you could say it's a Remnant nugget. It's unclear how Dr. Talbert got his hands on such a large amount of Remnant, but he had a steady supply that somehow was consistently delivered to his house. This also got the attention of an evil entity named Eleanor, who was introduced, or I guess created in the story to be beautiful from 1:35 a.m., the second Fazbear Frights book. Her goal was to obtain Remnant for herself to become even more powerful so that she could spread pain and suffering across the world using the power of positive vibes. However, what we currently know about Remnant and Agony tells us that to destroy it properly, we need to burn it. Hence why there have really been so many fires in this series. FNAF 3, 6, and 9 all end with something or someone getting set on fire. FNAF 3's fire was all about dealing with Springtrap, and FNAF 6 was about putting everyone who knew about the atrocities that occurred at Freddy's to rest, and sending William to hell. And then, in FNAF 9, we burn Trap multiple times to get him to stop possessing Freddy, and to again try to kill him. Because Gregory is not above killing. That's a topic for another day. And this is because Henry learned that the only way to destroy Remnant and put these beings to rest was through fire. But is that really how we deal with these animatronics and people? Because like, while 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Crest Pro Health toothpaste, 3 out of 3 FNAF fires haven't worked. We have been told that fire is the only thing that is hot enough to burn off Remnant and to actually destroy it, aside from the fact that matter cannot be created nor destroyed, but it's also been described as a liquid metal. Liquid metal is a hell of a lot hotter than your typical run-of-the-mill gasoline fire, trust me, okay? I have the expertise in this department, so in essence, every single animatronic who is supposed to be set free by a cleansing fire hasn't been so far. The only time we've seen souls actually be put to rest is in FNAF 3's Happiest Day minigame, which involved no fire and just putting the souls to rest by giving them what they wanted, a birthday party. But how could that be possible? Like, Dr. Talbert wouldn't lie to us. He's researching so his little girl wouldn't die, right? Well, this is where this theory starts to blow your mind. I don't think that Dr. Talbert, as described in the FNAF Fazbear Frights books, is a real person. Or rather, I don't think that Dr. Talbert is truly his name.
name. Let's think about it. Who else do we know with a daughter in a compromising position who would have an endless flow of remnant from an undisclosed source and a close personal friend working as his opposite? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, William frickin' Afton. William Afton, my friends, is the true identity of Dr. Talbot. William is no stranger to using aliases either. Remember Dave Miller from the Silver Eyes? Exactly. And this connection only gets stronger the more you look at it. See, Talbot's daughter ends up being impersonated by Eleanor, who in the Fazbear Frights books is, like, described to be Baby. She's described as basically Baby, just with a longer neck. So both daughters in this scenario also end up becoming Baby at some point. Renelle through being impersonated, and Elizabeth when she possessed Baby through, you guessed it, Remnant. And Talbot and Eleanor are attacked by the Stitch Wraith. What does that relate to? Perhaps the son, who is part animatronic that's been working to undo his father's plans? Michael? Have we seen the animatronics in the games? No, so how can we take any of what's being said in the Fazbear Frights epilogues as fact? The baby blob turned out to be real, but everything else could simply be a metaphor. And Renelle might not even be meant to represent Elizabeth. It could be meant to represent Crying Child, making Eleanor Elizabeth and the Stitch Wraith Michael, and honestly, that sounds like a much more plausible solution than what's being described in these books, especially with the revelation that Gregory could, again, be a rebuilt Crying Child robot, because all these experiments with Remnant worked. If this was truly describing William and Crying Child and Michael and Elizabeth, this would make perfect sense with the story. This is like a recap of what's been going on with FNAF. FNAF 4, Crying Child dies. So William promises that he will put him back together by finding Remnant after he kills the 5 missing children and then disassembling them in FNAF 3's minigames when he releases the spirits and then gets trapped in the Springlock suit. But then we also learn in the original novel trilogy that the remnant from the original 5 animatronics was injected into the Funtime animatronics. So while the Funtime animatronics have the souls of the 5 missing children all combined into one, they also are serving as an experiment for how he can use it to bring back his son. And he even injects Eleanor, who was impersonating Renelle, with the remnant, just as he recreates Crying Child into Gregory. So here's how I see it. William as Talbot through, I'm guessing, just journals that Henry just somehow stumbled onto were made to spread the rumor of Remnant needing to burn, to be destroyed, so that if Henry ever tried to stop William, he wouldn't be able to. That's why William knows he'll always come back. He's rigged the game, and in doing so, ensured the survival of himself, his daughter, and his 2 sons. Renelle is a representation of Crying Child, having been bitten at his birthday party in 1983 that William is trying to save. Eleanor is the power-hungry daughter Elizabeth that only wants the remnant for herself, even willing to abandon her father to die to live another day, as we see with the Afton amalgamation, or even kill her father, as we potentially see at the end of the true FNAF Security Breach ending. And the Stitch Wraith is Michael, at first misunderstood, killing his creator like Michael tried in the FNAF 3 and 6 Fire, but in reality trying to right the wrongs of his father before him and bring peace to his family. And as we see in Security Breach, they accomplished their goals. Gregory, representing Crying Child, is back. He and Freddy, representing Michael, stopped William, and Vanny, Elizabeth, gets to fight another day. Now, I'm not some MatPat sympathizer who wants to defend him so he'll notice me or something, because this is a theory that I've had since the Funko statues were revealed. At least I think they're by Funko. At least the statues for the game, once they were revealed, I've had this theory. So I am truly looking at the theory and not blinded by my like or dislike of MatPat. I'm simply looking at what we've been presented with to see if what we've been saying here, in my eyes, is truly possible. One of the main reasons everyone seems to be so frustrated by this idea is because it's far-fetched. Is it really, though? Like, let's look at some of the elements of the series and really talk about what the series has actually gone through, okay? Kids have been stuffed into animatronic suits only to end up possessing them. Those spirits were then released when William Afton decided to disassemble the animatronics and were able to scare him into getting trapped in his own animatronic suit. William has survived 3 fires while being present in all of
followed them for the entirety of them, as we see in Sister Location's ending, where he was in Fazbear Frights after it had already been burnt down for a while. We see in Security Breach that he was still in the FNAF 6 location after it had burned down, meaning that he was there for the whole fire, and he was literally standing in fire multiple times during the final fight in Security Breach's true ending. None of those times has he been completely killed either. Also, none of the FNAF 6 animatronics were actually wiped out. They were just melded into one blob. A woman who was simply testing a VR game had her body taken over by a sentient virus that was able to lock her subconscious in a mobile game that was then ported to an arcade cabinet without letting her regain control of her body, and despite how many kids have gone missing, people continue to come back to the Fazbear restaurants, despite it basically being a giant casino game as to whether you're going home with your kid at this point. And that's only in the games. There are plenty of similar elements going on in the books, and while yes, the books aren't canon to the games, they share information and help explain what can and cannot be possible in this game world as Scott sees it. The sound illusion discs that plenty of people consider to be the cause for FNAF 4's animatronics first appeared in the Twisted Ones novel and hasn't had a canon appearance in the games. A disc people think could be an illusion disc can be found in Sister Location, but in that game they call it a power module. Therefore, it is not confirmed to be a sound disc. If you believe that FNAF 4's nightmare animatronics are the result of illusions created by sound emitted from discs, you cannot dismiss his theory because he used the books to prove it. Because that's literally what you're doing with the FNAF 4 sound discs, okay? They're from the books, so that's a double standard. The reveal of William Afton's name came from the Silver Eyes novel as well, which was proven to be true in the Sister Location opening scene during William Afton's interview seemingly with the police. And in the books, there is a legit kid who was turned into a series of robots so that she could grow up like a normal person despite being killed, and they're both named Charlotte or some variation of it. Charlie, for example, in the books. So, children being animatronics is not a stretch for these games, and it's already been present in some aspects of the FNAF lore. While the story and the sequence of events from the novel are not canon to the games, they both share similar characters and ideas that we can't just ignore because they're presented in another medium. Another thing I see popping up quite a lot is that a brown-haired, dark-eyed white character can really be anybody. It's been memed incredibly hard, with various people putting plenty of characters over that frame in his episode, with some people saying that he's just comparing two white kids, so of course they look the same. I want to say how this argument of he could be anyone is absolutely ridiculous, because while yes, he is comparing the characters he wants to compare and comparing seemingly meaningless things, take a look at this picture of how Crying Child is presented to us in FNAF 4. This is the only real view we have of this character. He is literally an 8-bit character that's like 64 pixels high with less detail than a picture of Sudbury in a snowstorm. So design choices like hair color and stripes on the shirt are the only way we're able to compare characters and identify Crying Child. And logically, if Scott was making Gregory a robot Crying Child, they would not have the exact same outfit. And like, how would you picture Crying Child in a 3D medium? Because Gregory's design makes a lot of sense. And if you dropped Gregory down to 8-bit like you would see in FNAF 4, they would still look awfully similar. There is also the point that Gregory's vision gets weird when approached by Vanny. And keep in mind, it's only Vanny specifically and not any other enemies. This is hard to explain if Gregory is just some random kid, because the effect we see on screen is that of an old camera when like you'd bring a magnet close to it. The reason it would only happen around Vanny is due to her being controlled by the sentient virus we see take control in FNAF VR, since she seems to be the only one able to spread it aside from Burn Trap. And notice that in normal gameplay we can't actually get near Burn Trap, so we can't know if he was meant to give us this effect. Yes, in the game we can get to him, but that's through a glitch, so if that error wasn't there in the game, we wouldn't know if he did or did not give us this effect. And since we aren't supposed to get to him, they wouldn't code it in, because why would there be a logical reason for him to have that effect if he's not going to get close to us? And the last bit of rebuttal I'm seeing as to how Gregory is not a robot Crying Child is that he's too young for it, since Crying Child died in 1983. Are you serious? Guys, it's a robot, okay? It wouldn't age. When Charlie was made into a robot, she literally had to have 4 separate versions so that she could then grow up to be an adult. This could simply be a younger version of the crying child robot that ran away from home, hence why he lives on the streets, and therefore could reasonably have as much life experience as he seemingly does. This kid is able to drive a van, is willing to kill Vanny in the disassemble ending, is able to use the jumper cables on a car battery to fix Freddy's power issue properly, and is able to speak full sentences despite seemingly being small enough to fit inside Freddy, random baby strollers, and other various bits around the Pizzaplex. Keep in mind that the opening inside Freddy is very small. That's an awful lot of knowledge that a 12-year-old, if he even is supposed to be 12, wouldn't realistically have, especially if he was homeless and or living inside the Pizzaplex. It's almost as if this kid has 40 years of life experience, which would only be possible if he was in fact a robot. The whole being a robot for 40 years thing would also explain why he would no longer fear the animatronics, if he is at least meant to be a robot crying child, which could also explain why he decides to stay at the end of the game, because he has more experience and knows that no one else is gonna do anything. There we have it, friends. Is Gregory a robot? It's not confirmed, but the possibility is there, and there's no denying it. And is Gregory a robot crying child? Honestly, it's less likely, but considering how Scott keeps bringing William Afton back, can we really consider anyone as permanently gone in this series? I don't think so. Now, based on the points I made last time, there are a few things that we need to go over. Firstly, the breaking and entering does not apply in the actual game, but can come into play later on. He is 100% trespassing though, despite being locked inside. He actively hid inside of Freddy, like in his stomach, instead of leaving the Pizzaplex, which would make this trespassing. Every time I mention stealing, like in the merch, the security badges, even Freddy, there's no arguing that. He does in fact steal those. The main argument against these is that, well, he needs to do this to survive, which is blatantly not true. Okay, Freddy informs Gregory that the doors will reopen at 6 a.m. All Gregory needs to do at that point is just stay in Freddy's green room or the area behind it until 6. Nothing else was necessary in order for him to survive. The only problems occur when Gregory tries to get out sooner. He causes his own problems. Vanny only ends up knowing Gregory is in the Lost and Found because she put him there as Vanessa. So, with that logic in mind, Vanny would not have known that Gregory was in Freddy or Freddy's green room. He says that himself. And Vanessa does not check inside Freddy when you approach her while piloting him. So as far as the argument that he needed to do this to survive, no he didn't. Unless he ends up making the problems himself, which would completely destroy his case. So, glad we got that settled. One of the other points of contention was really everything else he did was in self-defense. He had to destroy the animatronics. He had to kill Vanny in the phaser blast ending, otherwise they would have killed him. But while self-defense does sometimes justify killing in order to protect yourself or your loved ones, this is typically used for human-on-human interactions. Human-on-robot interactions wouldn't necessarily fall under self-defense. The animatronics would have to be proven that they didn't intend to harm Gregory, and this could be done using code analysis and camera footage. However, we know that the animatronics were hacked, and whoever Client 46 is did the hacking. Now, if Client 46 is Gregory, which in the context of this world they would know, and the evidence seems to actually point to, the fact that the animatronics were after him could be seen as his fault, since he actually disturbed their original programming. This is also where the footage of him in the Pizzaplex would have come out, particularly the image where he was talking to someone with rabbit ears, thus showing the jury that Gregory and Vanny had a personal relationship, further hurting his case. Gregory by no means had to destroy the animatronics. He chose to do it. Freddy even asks him not to. Gregory didn't do it because he had to, he did it because he wanted revenge. He even says it himself, quote, "They get what they deserve." He was destroying them for revenge and to get the parts for Freddy, not so that they wouldn't hurt him, since after all they can still come and kill him after he destroys them. So he does destroy property because he wanted the animatronics to suffer, not because he had to in order to be safe again. Again, could have just hid in Freddy's room or somewhere else. People are also saying that he's homeless, so he has to steal. Firstly, homeless or not, it's still illegal to steal. And secondly, I don't think that he needs Roxy balloons, action figures, and stuffed characters in order to survive survive another day. I'm not saying that he shouldn't keep himself alive, I'm just saying that what he's doing is illegal, which is true no matter who you are. And anything I included in those numbers was not a story item, and instead the extra items that you do not need in order to beat the game. And you didn't need to steal Freddy at all. There is no justification for him running off with Freddy other than the fact that they're friends. But then again, it's grand larceny and illegal. One commenter decided to try and provide legal defense for Gregory in a lighthearted manner because that was also the point of the video. So I'd like to reply to Jason Ross's defense for the theft of security badges. Quote from his comment: "While this is technically a crime, I think he could make a strong case with any halfways decent lawyer that he did so out of necessity. He stole stuff to help further his attempts to escape unlawful confinement and other crimes committed against him. Stealing those items he stole was necessary to save himself. He would never have survived the night if he didn't steal." First of all, you just outright admitted that it was a crime, which an actual attorney would have torn to shreds. Secondly, like I've been saying, he could have been hiding the entire time, okay? He would have survived if he had just hid until 6. He doesn't escape any sooner than 6 a.m. You progressing throughout the game just makes the time go to 6. He never escapes sooner. He did not have to steal the security badges. Unlawful confinement, as you said, is described as whoever wrongfully restrains a person as to prevent that person to move beyond a certain restricted limit is said to have committed the offense of wrongful confinement. However, nobody restrains Gregory, literally, as well. Like, they don't actually like timed anything. He gets himself locked in the Pizzaplex. Nobody locked him in there intentionally. The doors close automatically at midnight, and he had plenty of time to leave, but didn't, and he chose to climb inside Freddy, which also ruins your argument against trespassing, which was also wrongful confinement. And for all intents and purposes, in the eyes of the law and any outsiders, Vanessa was actively trying to help him. There are recordings of her claiming to have called the police, which would have been verified certainly, but even if she had called them and claimed something else, the record of her calling 911 would be there. Most of Ross's case relies on unlawful confinement. However, staying in somewhere and then wanting to leave does not constitute unlawful confinement. And to the public, Vanessa was trying to help get him home, but he was avoiding her. We know that she was trying to kill him, but the public doesn't. Now for the biggest issue that everyone seemed to have with this list, the one that I'm sure y'all clicked on this video for. The claim that killing Vanny was murder and not self-defense. And this claim is really the reason I wanted to make this video, because I can't reply to every single comment that was referring to this, okay? Self-defense can be a defense to an assault, battery, and criminal homicide because it always involves the use of force. Most states have special requirements when the defendant uses deadly force in self-defense. Deadly force is defined as any force that could potentially kill. An individual does not have to actually die for the force to be considered deadly. Examples of deadly force are the use of a knife, gun, vehicle, or even bare hands when there is a disparity in size between the two individuals. Or, in this case, the use of animatronic robots to kill Vanny, as Gregory does in the Phaser Blast ending, which would also set a precedent for robots being counted as deadly force. To successfully claim self-defense, a defendant must prove 4 elements. First, with exceptions, the defendant must prove that he or she was confronted with an unprovoked attack. Second, the defendant must prove that the threat of injury or death was imminent. Third, the defendant must prove that the degree of force used in self-defense was objectively reasonable under the circumstances. And fourth, the defendant must prove that he or she had an objectively reasonable fear that he or she was going to be injured or killed unless he or she used self-defense. The Model Penal Code defines self-defense as justifiable when the actor believes that such force is immediately necessary for the purposes of protecting himself against the use of unlawful force by such other person on the present occasion. Okay, so I'm willing to admit that the attack was certainly unprovoked. Vanny did not need to come after him in order to get him out of the Pizzaplex. However, that second issue, the proof of threat of injury or death was imminent, is where things get complicated. At no point in the game does Vanny directly threaten Gregory with any words. Her voice lines include, "See you soon," "Disassemble Freddy," "There you are you having fun yet?" laughter, and "Let's have some fun." While menacing, none of these involve a direct threat. At no point in the game does she brandish a knife or even send the security bots after Gregory to disassemble him. She only sends the 3 main ones to collect him, who also make no appearance in this ending, therefore do not count. Yes, when she catches us we get a game over screen, but that's just us losing the game. That isn't necessarily us being killed. Us thinking that we get killed is simply an assumption because we don't see what happens next. However, in this case, since we made it to the end, Gregory had never been caught by Vanny. While yes, she does end up destroying an animatronic, it was just an animatronic. that's not really a threat on Gregory. Now, let's skip point number 3 for a minute and then move on to point number 4. That the defendant must prove that he or she had an objectively reasonable fear that he or she was going to be injured or killed unless they used self-defense. While yes, Gregory is a child, or seemingly a child, who would have a more extreme view of the world, he literally spent 6 hours running and hiding from Vanny, where he ended up surviving. In fact, he was right at the Pizzaplex door to leave, but instead of leaving, he chose to go after Vanny, thus turning this act of possible self-defense into a possible act of vigilantism, or even turning Gregory into the aggressor. He and Freddy went to confront Vanny. He says himself maybe that they can catch her in her room at Phaser Blast. Gregory could have left and survived, but chose not to, meaning that he cannot claim self-defense in an altercation that he created. And now for the final point. The defendant must prove that the degree of force used in self-defense was objectively reasonable under the circumstance. Now, being a child, there is a leeway as to what he would deem reasonable force, but in this case, it is absolutely not reasonable force. We see how destroyed Freddy is after he gets disassembled, okay? His chest and torso are gaping open. He had his insides ripped out. And then he even ends up dying in an animatronic sense, even though his body and his head have been shown to work separately. And then Gregory orders the same thing done to Vanny, a human who would be alive as the animatronics ripped her ribs and intestines from her body. Does that sound reasonable to you? Because killing in self-defense is easiest to claim when the death you cause is quick or painless. But Vanny suffered, and suffered hard. Even criminals on death row do not get this treatment. A serial killer with more kills than Vanny would just get the simple 2-dose lethal injection, where the first dose actually is intended to dull the pain of the second dose. Under absolutely no circumstances would Vanny being torn apart so badly that the comic panels won't even show it be considered the proper amount of force. Especially when he could have said anything to stop or break or even kill. He could have just said kill. This is absolutely over the top, especially given that Gregory seems to have known her if he is indeed Client 46, which is also hinted at during the Princess Quest ending, but since that's a different ending, that doesn't really count here. Which, if he was Client 46, that would have appeared in court. So what kind of charges and juvenile time is Gregory facing because of this? Well, if Gregory had Mac Murdock as a lawyer, let's say, or as someone who's also a really good lawyer, they could possibly argue that this would rather be manslaughter than murder. However, Gregory knows what disassemble means, so an argument that this was an accident would be very tough to pull off. But looking at the minimum sentence, there are 3 possible outcomes for how he'd be treated. 1, the child is so young or mentally incompetent to not understand what they've done and are excused for criminal and civil liability from their actions. Not the case for Gregory, who knew full well what was going on the entire time throughout this game. 2, the child is old enough to understand what they have done, but not old enough or lacking in evidence of sufficient premeditation to charge them as an adult, so they are charged and tried as juveniles, which could be the case for Gregory and is the most likely outcome. And then 3, the child is old enough to understand what they have done and there is evidence of planning and premeditation such that they can be deemed to have acted as an adult might, and they are charged as an adult, with the exception that minors may not be sentenced to death. Now, this could be the way that the courts decided to go, since after all, Gregory did intend on confronting Vanny, since he could have left the Pizzaplex but instead went after her. If he is Client 46 as well, the images of him breaking into the Pizzaplex before could be interpreted as premeditation, especially if he was investigating the Pizzaplex because of Vanny. The state could also argue that his intention was always to kill her. So, with these rules in mind, we will look at a minimum and maximum sentence. The minimum would be a manslaughter charge. However, unlike murder, manslaughter does not carry an automatic sentence of life imprisonment. It remains, however, an opinion for the court. But looking at the situation, things wouldn't look too good for Gregory. A 9-year sentence, which is not uncommon, would allow the offender to be paroled after serving 3 years of their sentence. If a firearm is involved in the offense though, a minimum sentence of 4 years is required. And while the weapon was not a firearm, it could be argued that since she was a distance from him, that it could also be considered similar. So at least Gregory would be looking at 3 to 9 years for manslaughter. If he was charged with murder, however, he would absolutely be tried as an adult. And since this is the worst case, we'll go with first-degree murder, since the court could consider this planned and deliberate. Those convicted of first-degree murder all receive the same sentence: life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 25 years. A 20-year-old convicted of first-degree murder will be eligible for parole at the age of 45, and if they behave themselves, then they're likely to receive parole. But considering Gregory's personality and your comments on that top 10 video, I doubt that he'd like admit responsibility, show remorse. He doesn't seem like that kind of person. Although after 25 years, he may start looking at things differently, with new eyes, if you will. This is also if he ends up actually aging because he's a real human and not a robot like we're all thinking. And like if he doesn't age, a whole new investigation is gonna happen. So let's not get into that. The main issue I've been having is whether William is dead or alive. And there are a couple different things to consider here. Firstly, he is seemingly in a new endoskeleton, which would indicate that he's dead and Glitchtrap's consciousness is just being transferred into Burntrap's spot via the recharge station. But his head is clearly visible. Like, you can see his skull and his actual human jaw, meaning that he could still be holding on to this world via that head, especially given who we're talking about here. The most stubborn to ever grace our screens. This also can't be a new endo, and just the model that they're using for the others since it was easier and they could release the game faster. This seems to be indicated by the way that Burntrap walks. If this was a new endoskeleton, why would he be shambling like a zombie? But the claws and repaired sections to the actual endo also seem to indicate that this is also a new endo and possibly even Glamrock Bonnie's. So there's a whole lot of wrong going on here. All the points are intersecting and it's not fun. Originally, I was against the whole Glamrock Bonnie endoskeleton thing because, well, frankly, the body in the suit kind of disproved it for me, but I think I might have found a way to make it work. However, looking at the model, I'm still not 100% sure. If this was the Glamrock Bonnie endo, it would need to have broader shoulders and actually be shorter. Like, even scaling the Glamrock endo so that they're the same height, the endos, when posed the same and lined up, they don't match. There are similarities, of course, between the two designs, but there aren't enough similarities where I can call this even really above 50%. There's also the issue of the muscles being woven throughout the body, or maybe those are nerve fibers. If it was just the head, I'd understand, since they could have just pulled the old endo head and put it onto the new body. Since all the parts were intertwined, Afton's head would have come with it. But with the muscles throughout the rest of the endo, that's way too intricate to actually have been placed there. And they would only be there and not dangling if it had been stuck there after being shoved full of machine parts. I don't think that they're taking super glue to glue these fibers back onto a new endoskeleton. If Afton was going to transfer his head to a new endo, it wouldn't come with the rest of his body bits. It wouldn't. That's not how it works. Which would mean this would have to be Springtrap's endoskeleton, which also explains why it's so run down, why he shambles, and why he hardly has any casing. And Springtrap's design also seems to change from game to game. From FNAF 3 to FNAF 6, he was totally different, so him changing again in Security Breach seems like no big deal in comparison. It's basically normal for him to get a newer and seemingly scarier attempt at his design with a new game, and at least this has an understandable progression from the last game and even from FNAF 3, since it's more run down and not just a bigger head like Scraptrap. It's like he sold his soul for a bigger head and then the demon kind of made a joke out of it. The most reasonable assumption that I have for what happened though was that he was given the hands of Glamrock Bonnie since it has the claws, and just he wasn't given the entire endoskeleton. But then again, his arms have the bits of muscle and nerve fibers as well, which means that it would have to have been his old one, it would have to have been there from the start, it would have to be the arm of the old endoskeleton, which is a whole other conundrum because Scraptrap was missing an arm and Springtrap didn't have any casing on his foot, yet here we are. I just think that we have to kind of leave this one up to artistic license and accept that it's meant to be the same endoskeleton, just with a replacement part or two from Glamrock Bonnie instead of like the entire endoskeleton. It makes sense, honestly, and it's really the only reasonable explanation that we have. Unless the colors are wrong on the images that I was looking at and the bits on the hands are just meant to be melted casing, which is possible, but I doubt it. As for if he's wanted dead or alive, I think this version of Afton is actually finally dead. And honestly, I'm happy about that because it means that even if he's still here, we can kill him off for good. This is the most logical conclusion to me because, well, other than him basically being only a head, this guy has had multiple backslides of, oh, I'm dead, just kidding. And this time around, while we instantly predicted that he had indeed survived, I think that Scott is finally flipping the narrative on us. We predicted it, so it's not gonna happen. Afton is no longer connected to his body, as we can clearly see from the formation of Glitch Trap. And Glitch Trap being created would only be possible if Afton died, since the one you should not have killed was dead set on keeping him breathing. But Burn Trap, this guy doesn't even have lungs anymore. So yeah, this version of Afton's body is dead, but his consciousness lives on. Like how there's like the conspiracy that Walt Disney froze his head. Yeah, well, that's kind of what they did with Glitch Trap. And then that programming was probably uploaded into his old host, or I guess vessel, since I've been rewatching Supernatural. Basically, this guy would be impossible if he wasn't just Afton's code loaded onto an endoskeleton. Plus, the eyes are clearly robotic this time around with purple pupils, rather than the previous iterations that had seemingly real eyes, Afton's actual eyes, since it was in suit mode after he got snapped. And opening his head in those like secret FNAF 3 screens revealed that it was actually like his eyes because they were seemingly in the same place. So, all in all, here's the story of Burn Trap as far as I can tell. During the FNAF 6 fire, Afton passes out. Not dead, but still somehow alive thanks to the one you should not have killed, Crying Child. This leads to the events of Ultimate Custom Night that sees Afton stuck in his own mind trying to escape so that his spirit can move on. But Crying Child, represented by a golden bear like the one who crushed his skull, tries to keep him stuck, until eventually he throws everything that he has at him. 50-20 mode. After being so weakened by the fire, William survives this attack on his mind, and Crying Child's spirit is set free, hence the spasming bear at the end of that mode. That's him burning as the fire sets his soul free. William's soul then latches onto the nearest thing that it can find, one of the hard drives in the storage room that the Scrap Trap animatronic was being kept in. One that gets scanned to create the Freddy Fazbear virtual experience as the company tries to rebuild its reputation. Then, not wanting to waste the land that was bought for their company, Fazbear Entertainment begins building a new pizzaplex on top of their old location. Whether this is due to Glitch Trap possessing someone higher up at the company through the game, or someone just wanting to save money, is up in the air, but the remains of the FNAF 6 simulated pizzeria are buried under the pizzaplex's foundation. That's when Vanessa comes along, our player character from Help Wanted, who reassembles the 16 cassette tapes in an effort to destroy Afton once and for all, but ultimately fails. When our mind is distracted by following Tape Girl's instructions, William locks us in our mind and in the Princess Quest minigame that would later get ported to an arcade cabinet for insurance purposes. And by insurance, I mean like insurance on Vanessa so that she wouldn't easily be able to escape. As Vanny, William then uses the animatronics to dig out his body and put his old endoskeleton in a recharge station so that when he's able to transfer himself back into it, he'll be able to move. After all, at this point, he's not a spirit, but simply coding, which means that in another game, if he is still alive, we'll actually be able to kill him off. He also gives his old suit some upgrades in the form of Glamrock Bonnie's hands and right foot. Why would he not go with a new, more powerful endo, you ask? Because it's William and his Spring Bonnie suit. It's his body in there. Of course he'd want it back. He's been that way for like at least 40 years at this point. It's all he knows. Then, as Gregory and Freddy jump down into the pit, William can sense it. Either because he's an animatronic, because one or both of them are meant to be his kids, or something else, he activates his body even though it's not fully charged and tries to take over Freddy. He's not fully charged, hence the shambling, which Gregory ends up preventing with fire, which has surely traumatized Afton by now, and considering how he's only code, this time fire would actually finish the job. Eventually, the place actually catches on fire and Freddy and Gregory escape, but the blob grabs hold of William. Whether it was to save him or seal his fate is unknown, but this almost certainly isn't the end of William Afton's story.